My name's Ali Heather. I am fae a Scots-speaking village, New Biggin in Angus, and I was always kind of raised to appreciate the kind of poetry and storytelling side of Scots. And after I lived away in New Zealand and the Republic of Georgia and seen how their cultures navigated their minority languages, I got really inspired to come home and put Scots out there a bit more and celebrate it and discover more about it and research it. And social media was the main tool in the early days, especially that I had for sharing and celebrating that love of Scots and to find a community of other speakers. All these social media sites hate inbuilt prejudices. So what you mostly got was humour, and that's absolutely fine. But with Scots, we've had plenty of humour. So Twitter was really good for me in terms of finding a broader base of speakers for other dialect regions. So Angus and Baden Aberdeen, so I kent plenty of folk in like Murray and Aberdeen and Angus that were into Scots and were Scots speakers and Scots writers and all that. But I didn't ken folk for Ayr, for the Borders, for Shetland. And so Twitter was a great place to find them all, see how they wrote and get introduced to the kind of stuff that was existing in the literatures. Because Twitter was great for sending links to Abby and for belonging to a wee niche.
I think so. Putting all the negative stuff aside and just thinking about the more positive discourse that goes on there, I think definitely positive. Because then you got folk like Lion Penn being probably the key folk in there, Ali Heather, and that it's definitely driven a lot more since a community and sort of moved. I think it's been quite central to moving the lead for it. And then, well, obviously, that then brings the sort of more negative side of things, folk saying, well, that's rubbish, there's no such a thing as Scots and all that. But I suppose these conversations mean that Scots as a thing has been spoken about a lot more. And actually some of the negative things that are said about it, you're thinking, well, okay, that's because there's a poor understanding of what Scots is out there. And you get that seen for even Scots speakers themselves as seeing their Scots is quite unique, and they kind of slightly resistant to this umbrella term Scots. So I suppose for you with the negative stuff you hear is like, well, what can we do to start to change public opinion? And social media definitely plays a part in that.
I was a big Twitter user and it's now no longer what it was, and so that's a real sadness. I think it does represent Scotland, but I think that a lot of it is curated because of the nature of Twitter. You have to be more succinct, and I think that folk are less prone to communicate naturally when they have to self-edit. And because Scots speakers already have to self-edit, you kind of get a potted version of what someone's real way of communicating would be. I think that other platforms are better for Scots. But no, I think that for all the people deride it, like, oh, like Scottish Twitter's mad, like it's mental, like, no, not really. It's just the way that folk speak, and it just so happens that it's public and visible. I don't know why Twitter gets all the snash about it being like jokey or whatever.
Scottish Twitter is it's quite interesting because I feel like I mean I've not really been on Twitter for quite a while, but definitely in that sort of 2015 to 2020 era, it's quite a big part of it. It was suddenly this like new representation.
We Scots in particular, it here in this big kind of point of collision in the Twitter space, particularly around the referendum and kind of Scottish cultural re-emergence. It became a hot topic. And when it's a hot topic, politicians get involved on both sides, and the politicians then have taken it into Parliament, I think almost directly Twitter, and started passing legislation about it based on that. Twitter at the time in the 2010s was huge with the political classes, and they seen the stooshes on there about Scots and we minority languages in general and thought, hold on, something needs to be done about this. So I think the biggest impact was probably taking it into Parliament.
I think that folk are more aware that the way that they speak might be considered a language, because certainly my parents didn't and my grandparents didn't have social media, and I don't think they would have had many pals that would say, hey, you're actually speaking Scots, not English. And so no, I think that in terms of visibility and appreciating what Scots is versus English, it's been good. On one hand, you've got an increase in folks' awareness and perhaps appreciation that is separate, but on the other hand, because folk like to start arguments and troll folk online, I think that folk who ordinarily didn't really care about Scots or the fact that it was, different, suddenly lump it in with other things that they are more passionate about, say politics or national identity or things like that. I think that people who are detractors of Scots maybe wouldn't have really bothered if like they didn't have social media, but because they do have social media, it becomes part of their like, oh well, I'm anti-independence, I'm anti-equality, anti blah blah blah, and then they just tack on Scots language onto that. So I want to say it's polarized. I don't know if it's necessarily a change or just it's new that like now there's a community around folk finding other Scots speakers.
I would say I think it's overall negative because you hear a tendance towards international English to reach an audience. Anyone that's producing content on there more or less wants to appeal to a broad market. You do see absolutely exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, Instagram is an American English speaking place. I think that you even see English folks speaking with the least English accent they can get away with to try and reach that international audience. There is such a thing as like the TikTok voice. English is the lingua franca of the social media giants, the new.
I think positive. I don't really like social media myself, but we don't really use it much apart from to promote our work because our work is more like focused on live things. So, but I do get that it's probably helped a lot of other people like just to actually see it and for it to be visible. And I think a lot of younger generations feel a bit more empowered about using Scots and talking in Scots and writing in Scots. So yeah.
Yeah, when it's a tool of communication, it's definitely has positives. Obviously, we see a lot of negativity on social media, and when you kind of see sort of like weaponized kind of movements and stuff like that, you'll always things like Scots and anything that's not part of the stats pool will always be sort of in the crosshairs.
Social media is the way that folk communicate now. Like it's just like yes, there's before social media, if you were interested in Scots language, you would need to go to your library to see if there was any book groups meeting, or you would need to subscribe to Lallans magazine, or you would need to go to the theatre to see like a production of the Jolly Beggars or something. Whereas now, even if you have a passing interest, you might see somebody's Scots word of the day, or a post from the Scots language committee.
Alright lads, Scots word of the day today is clook. This is a noun which refers to a drop stitch or a loose thread, and the English equivalent for this word would be ravel. An example sentence says, "Och, you've a wee clook on your breeks, give me them off."
No, there's no doubt that social media has been great for Scots that way.
So Facebook is undeniably still the best space to read written Scots, and is the biggest producer of Scots prose that I see. So I'm in all sorts of groups for across the northeast, like all the groups for Buckie and Banff and Kennemuir and all that. It's the spoken voice written down. So you see hundreds of good quality Scots written in their groups, and it's proper long screeds of prose, which we didn't hear like traditional Scots. So that's, I think, Facebook, because it gives you that space and it gives folk the sense of belonging to a community.
If you've looked at things like maybe more on Facebook, so there's a Scots language forum and stuff like that for folk from all areas of Scotland come together and discuss it. But then the folk that are part of that are passionate about Scots, so you never really get the wider population in there. I suppose on Twitter and that, a lot of times folk mightn't even realise that they're speaking Scots. It's just the language that they're using, but they'll do it in their local way. I think the probably general population didn't really appreciate it as much as it could as being part of a community. And I think that's a key thing for our Vice, certainly from my perspective. I'm being keen to get into our response to the languages bill and stuff is building that sense of community, because there's more, okay, we've all got our unique differences for LK area, but when I went along to Shetland forward stuff, there's a lot of words that I ken, but there's a lot of words that I do ken, and I was quite surprised. Like, no surprise, but I was like, God, I totally understand what they're mostly speaking about. But then folk up in Shetland might not even realise that a lot of the words that they're using in their dialect is just the same as what we were using in the Northeast. I suppose Northeast, we've got our own words. A lot of times the words that are different have to do with the traditional industries, like farming and fishing.
I think creativity in Scots and confidence in Scots is particularly strongest with the older generation and probably weakest with the younger generation. So like I say, Facebook for these about 112-year-olds. you see good, confident Scots there. And I suppose at the minute TikTok's the youngest platform, but that's obviously changing rapid. I think you want to see young folk finding the creativity, finding the voice, finding the audience, finding the community in Scots. And if our folk are being creative is TikTok, then I'd love to see it on TikTok. I personally, I'm 35-year-old, so I'm not going on there. It's not for me. But you just want to see folk using it, whatever that is.
There's TikTok, obviously, but because it is because folk say, oh, it's not a written language, it's a spoken language, which is rubbish. But to see folk just it's really difficult to find a video on YouTube of just somebody speaking Scots, just not like from the Scots language center, not like a lecturer like using Scots to discuss like Mary Queen of Scots or something. Just someone speaking Scots. Like you can kind of find it with like football commentary, or like if a farmer gets interviewed like on the local news, but there's no like just folk speaking Scots, like without making a point to. So I think that having just increased visibility, and YouTube videos can get embedded everywhere and shared on all the other platforms.
I think people like maybe from our generation don't quite actually, I think, fully comprehend the scale of social media platforms. So I think we're forgetting websites like Twitch and kind of like YouTubers and sort of like the kind of power of that content creation does have. I guess because most of the artists I know that work in Scots language are kind of around about our age or older. Obviously that's mainly just because the younger ones are still at uni, or are still kind of developing their skills and stuff like that. So I guess just sort of connecting that in a way, because then you'll sort of have a bit more potential for people who do work in Scots language to actually use those websites and stuff like that.
I don't think we need more programs about Scots. I don't think there needs to be as much effort on media about Scots, like, because that's what the sort of thing that is on YouTube just now. It's like, what is Scots? Well, Scots is a language, blah, blah, blah. There just needs to be media where folk are speaking Scots. Now, it can be scripted so it includes more vocab that might ordinarily not be used. But I think the point needs to be that it's just something else, and the folk in it, or like the storyline or whatever, just happens to be in Scots. And I think that's what needs to happen.
I ken that there's a new director that they feed the BBC Scotland, and they are dead interested in Scots. They're from Fife, they ken all about Scots, they understand it as a spoken community language, and I think I wouldn't go as far to say they ken that BBC Scotland hasn't done a good job with Scots, but there's definitely more space for it now, because the BBC are trying to reach communities in trusted voice, and I think Scots can do that. So I think in the media, I'd expect to see it more regularly featured, and my hope would be get more comfortable. So when young folk are just on the radio, they didn't think about putting on their phone voice, or when they're on the telly, they didn't think about putting on their phone voice, or when they're doing a wee TikTok video, they didn't think about putting on their phone voice. They just do it in Scots or English as they feel best suits the message and best suits the folk they're trying to communicate with. Because have I said that bilingualism is the way that Scots have survived? It's accepting and celebrating Scots as a lead and English as another, and you are utterly competent and confident in English, but you also have that inheritance that you can explore and grow with your Scots.
The whole aim at our vice for the start was to achieve a Scots languages bill, so we'll get a Scottish languages bill, so that's positive. And a key component to that was the need for a board for Scots, so a Scots board, so maybe not necessarily like Burst na Gaelic, but certainly a formal statutory body that would oversee the development and policies related to Scots. So to get us up to like a par with Gaelic and English in Scotland. So as part of the bill, so for Scots, it's going to come out the back of it is a strategy for Scots. And what we've been pushing for is thinking about that in a sort of roadmap sense, so like short, medium and long term for the language. And within that, there needs to be a clear strategy for media, because it's so central. So Abdi's saying there's no Scots on the TV. Okay, so what are the steps that we're going to take to increase spending on Scots and making sure folk that are responsible for the delivery of that are their feet are kind of held to the fire a bit? I think it's going to be a long road, and we just have to head at it, really. But without folk actively campaigning and mobilising around that, nothing will nothing will happen.
First of all, we own the means of production as far as broadcasting is concerned now. So just put it out there. Put it out there. Like there's nothing stopping us now. So we can point our finger and say, oh, the Education Act in the 1800s dinged Scots down for its place in the schools. We can say that BBC didn't give Scots official status. Well, it has official status now. We can put it out there. The BBC just had my latest Radio 4 documentary, which is all in Scots, about Scots poetry. There's nothing stopping us. So it's about us finding our place. The main broadcasters have lost their confidence. They didn't have the market share anymore. They're looking to the young generation. What do we want to see? What do we want to put out there? So if you're making content, make it in Scots as well as English. Think about expanding your vocabulary. Think about expanding your resources.
There's this, I don't know who said it, like some Irish, like never make fun of somebody who mispronounces a word, because that lets you know that they read it, they've learned it by reading the book. Like saying the wrong thing, but you've never heard it read out loud. Like, yeah, people don't put English on a pedestal like that. Yeah, and if folks do make mistakes and say the wrong word, like folks say, oh, what do you mean? And then they'll say another synonym, and that's fine. But if somebody uses a Scots word, you're like, oh, your dictionary dredging there. Yeah, I think the folk are too precious about only knowing the words from their local area.
In the broadest definition of platform, the platforms I'd like to see a bit more Scots representation on is probably television, publishing, and stage, definitely.
I think Scots just needs to be on TV, on radio a lot more than it is now. And I think more TV shows, news things, like just in every sort of form you can get media or entertainment. I think Scots needs to be a part of that because it's a language in the country that we all live in and a lot of people speak it, and I think it's important.